back out by Jamie Baker. Yushkevich wheels it back in. Lindros lost. Archibald takes him out of the play. Up with it is Recchi. Walks in front. Shot one, knocked down. Rebound, score! Lindros!
Everybody, it's Isaiah, just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey.
And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 152. The Flyers season has ended. We have some very interesting numbers. And, of course, we have an esteemed guest. The O&B Puckcast is brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. And, of course, Jim South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. 40 years of the best cheesesteaks, hoagies, and fries, and the grandest Philadelphia tradition. And if you live down there and you can't get over, don't worry, they use DoorDash. So remember, you got to hit that bucket list with the best cheesesteak. Go to Jim South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. Okay, without any further ado, tonight, the chef is not able to make it, and Dan Silver may be joining us later, but no worries. We got it all covered with our buddy from ESPN 97.3 in South Jersey. His name is Kevin Durso.
It's great to be back. I'm happy to do it, and let's put a wrap on this season for good, hopefully. Yeah,
Kev, we got to go through a couple numbers here that kind of speak to what this season was about. So in 82 games, the Flyers went 25, 46, and 11 for only 61 points. They were a minus 87 goal differential. And even under Mike Yeo, they went 17, 35, and 7. We'll get to Mike and his fate directly. The other thing is, and this is from Jason Martinez, really good stat. From the beginning of last year, in January of 21, all the way through the end of the season, the Flyers were 50, 69, and 19. That is 26th in the NHL, and they were no higher than 26th, and sometimes last in categories like goals for, goals against, power play, PK, and now they're the fourth worst team in the league after Seattle blew that position for them. Seattle had a 3-1 lead versus the Winnipeg Jets, and the Jets come back and win it. So the Flyers will have the fourth best chance to be in the ping pong ball lottery for the draft. But, before worrying about that, Kevin, what's your overall assessment of what this season was for the Flyers?
Thank goodness it's over. That's my overall assessment of it pretty much. I mean, it's really tough. It's tough from where I sit. It's tough, obviously, from where the players are. It's tough when you know that it's already over and it's not even halfway there. I mean, they were already on their second double-digit losing streak by the halfway point of the season. It's hard to kind of get up for these things when, it's already over and there's not really much to get fired up about in games. You can see how everything kind of culminates with the playoff teams. Those first couple playoff games, you saw how energetic they are now because, okay, their fate of being a playoff team was probably known, maybe a month ago or a couple weeks ago, but now there's still an energy there. You got your position, you figured out where you were going to play in the first round, and now you get to really rev it up for the big deal. And, when you're on the opposite side of that, like the Flyers were, it's just about getting to the end of the road at that point. You just want to get this thing over with, I would imagine. And, as disappointing as it was, because I didn't make it to the season finale. I was under the weather, unfortunately, and I chose not to pass anything along to any of my colleagues. So that was the reason I stayed home. But it was just like, a relief that it's over, that there's not another game to go to. You start over next year. Not necessarily to say that a new season is going to bring about a ton of hope with this franchise per se, but, when you start over at no record and who knows what kind of shape the roster is in and what it looks like, at least you start off with something that's a little hopeful, I suppose, as opposed to where they were halfway through the year when you're done and there is no hope. It's just get it over with as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, ever since the trade deadline, when we had you on after that particular show, when Giroux gets traded and some of the moves are made, really it's been about watching the kids and see finally some of these Hextall draft picks, most of them were Hextall draft picks, finally coming to fruition. And then, of course, the trade acquisition of Owen Tippett. And I figured, why don't we start off with some good news tonight and look at some of these kids, project how you think, they're going to do, where they're going to be starting next year. And maybe after we review a little bit of what they were able to accomplish. And maybe we could start out with Noah Cates, who seemed to do the best and make the smoothest transition to the NHL.
Yeah, I'm smiling as you bring him up because he was just a fun player to watch at the end of the year. He looked the most ready of any of the college kids that came in. And to me, I guess it would be that Sunday game against Pittsburgh right at the end of the year. And I don't know how to envision a roster for next season without him on it. I just can't picture them keeping him off the roster. If he comes into camp looking exactly as he was at the end of this season, I don't know how you leave him off and say he's not an NHL player, because he is. And the thing that actually impressed me the most about him wasn't necessarily the hunger for the net and the ability to score a couple goals. I thought he was just a really good two-way player right off the bat. And that stood out to me. And, I'm not going to have as glowing reviews on some of the other kids that got a look, and that's just experience. It's not to knock their abilities, but he looked the most ready. And I don't know if that's just the college game, if that's that, taste of the Olympics. He got a lot more of valuable experience in terms of playing against guys who were older, stronger, different, amounts of experience than probably any other college prospect the team had. And I think that showed in his game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the hockey sense and the attention to detail, very, very impressive. And he had 5 goals, 4 assists for 9 points in 16 games. And I agree. I think he definitely looks like a lock. In fact, he reminds me somewhat, and I'm not the only one to say this, of where Oscar was before he had the illness, in terms of his attention to detail on the ice and good defensive play, and was trusted by the coaches.
Yeah, you see that right away. I mean, you just see how they were able to throw him into a lot of different situations and kind of just let him play freely. And I think that was the best thing that I think you could ask for when it came down to the end of the season, was trying to let some of these guys play as freely as possible. It doesn't always work that way. He looked like he just didn't seem to have anything on his mind other than just trying to make the right play. And that's going to go a long way for him. I don't know that his career projection is going to be anything super spectacular, but it doesn't have to be. I think for where he was drafted and the style he plays, he looks like a perfect third liner to me. And I'd love to see him continue in a role that's kind of around that. He doesn't have to be the number one goal scorer on the team. He's probably never going to be the number one goal scorer on the team, but there's nothing that says he has to. If he can just play a smart enough game where he gets to chip in offensively to a good level, I think the 5 goals are a great start for him in a very limited sample. It tells me he's got, probably 10 to 15 goal potential down the road. And then, play your defensive game the right way too, because you're going to help the team tremendously if you are taking care of the puck in the defensive end, making good outlet plays and finding ways to set guys up to have more success going the other way by creating from the defensive zone first. So I think that those are all great foundations of his game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just having enough players out there who do the right things near the blue lines and in the neutral zone would really be a big improvement from what we've seen with some of the other players that they've had, particularly some of the veterans they've had to call in off the street, guys like Patrick Brown and all that. And when you have more players like Noah Cates and Lazinski, who didn't quite make it to the NHL this year because of injury, then you don't have to rely on those types of players who are doing the best they can. But I think we can do a little bit better with our homegrown talent, which brings us to Ronnie Attard, who had 4 goals, 4 assists, 8 points in 15 games, got off to a little bit of a slow start, made some nice adjustments. What do you think?
He had his moments. So I don't want to just take away from everything, to watch him get a few points like that. It was good for him to get that level of experience and things like that. He looks more like a guy to me that needs time in the AHL. And I could have, obviously I think the injuries got in the way at the end of the year. The more injuries piled up for the veterans on the team, they just had no choice. They had to play him. If that wasn't the case, I think they may have sent him down to play in the minors for the last couple of weeks, just because I think that maybe around the first 10 games was enough of a sample to say, okay, he's got some ability to play at this level, but he could definitely use the work just to adjust to the pace. I think that was the biggest and toughest adjustment for him, was the level of pace of play and the way that things are at the NHL level. I mean, he basically had to, or by signing and getting right into the NHL, he jumped 2 levels basically. So, you kind of saw how that jump affected him. So I think that he's the type of guy I would have on the radar for the AHL for the start of next year. I don't want to rule him out completely. I don't think it's impossible for him to come up in the middle of the year and be a contributor, but I don't want to set that expectation either, because I think he definitely showed he needs a lot of work and a lot more experience as a pro before you can solidify him in the NHL lineup.
Yeah, but he does look like he has an NHL future and a high enough ceiling and floor that we should see him in orange and black, if not toward the end of next season, maybe certainly in 23.
Yeah, I would say so. And he's got some of the good raw tools that you like to see from a defenseman, especially. I mean, he really has them on the offensive side. You got to look at his shot at one point in time. You can see how he's got the ability to potentially quarterback a power play and be effective there. And he is a really good skater. I'll give him credit for that. He's a really good skater. I think he just needs to continue to adjust to the way that guys are going to move at this level and some of the shifty things that guys will do, because it kind of threw him out of sorts a little bit at this level. It's obviously a totally different game than the college game. So I think he could use that minor league time and put it to his advantage, and then come up ready to go whenever that time comes, and just emerge in that opportunity, because, very much the way a Cam York did. Like Cam York looks more polished now because of the fact that he got that time in the minors. And I think that's kind of where Ronnie Attard is right now. He needs that time to kind of polish up as a pro, and then when he can get rolling again and get that opportunity at the right time, I think we'll see much better from him down the road.
Yep, absolutely. One guy who definitely is an NHL player who is going to be working on some stuff. Owen Tippett, 4 goals, 3 assists, 7 points in 23 games. You see the speed, you see the shot. He hasn't been able to finish. He wants to work on some things. Your evaluation?
Well, the finishing was a problem for me, and the only reason it's a problem for me is because of the fact that that's what his success is going to be built around. He's got the shot to be a successful goal scorer, and he really kind of can't keep topping out at those numbers that he's on pace for, where he was at. I mean, basically, he's on that pace level where I think he's somewhere in the range of maybe 9 to 12 goals and 25, 30 points usually in a full season. He can't continue to top out there. He's got to continue to take steps because he's got the tools and he's been getting the opportunities. He probably deserved more than what he got in terms of total goals as a Flyer at the end of this year. Because, how many breakaways did he have? How many times is he in the right spot to potentially get that shot off and it either just doesn't go or he's not able to get it off cleanly or for whatever reason? So that, to me is the big thing for him, is taking that next step as a finisher, because it's there. We can see it's there. And he did look like he took some small steps. He's got a long way to go in certain areas, but he took some small steps in terms of, you want to see him take those bigger steps with the physical play or with the board battles and continue to take those steps in his skating, because he didn't look near as bad a skater as he was advertised. But there were a couple games where I saw he looked like he was having trouble staying engaged, a little bit. Like, you got to stay focused and stay involved in the game because he can be a key player. And I look no further than that last goal he scored in the final game of the season. That should be his bread and butter in terms of being on a power play, lining up kind of from the Ovechkin spot and letting it go when the opportunity's there. And he should be able to score a lot of goals in that way if he's able to get them off the right way and use that shot to, as advertised. That was it right there for me. I saw it and I'm like, that's what should be his game for years to come. And it's now just got to come with more consistency. But I liked the overall skill set and the raw tools in the beginning. But it just all kind of has to come together. But I do agree also, he's more, at this point, a graduate of the AHL game. He can play at this level, and he can score at this level. He's just got to start showing it with more consistency and finish on those opportunities because he had plenty of games where he was getting 2, 3, 4 opportunities a game and coming away empty. And that can't happen when you're getting 2, 3, 4 opportunities with his kind of offensive skill set.
Yeah, there's no question. And he's cognizant of that. And he's talked about working with a skills coach, adding some deception to his shot, things like that, more subtleties. So I'm hoping that work ethic that he can apply himself will result in better numbers next year. And we'll see how that goes. One player that I think is definitely ticketed for the AHL, although I'm very impressed with him, is Bobby Brink. No goals, 4 assists, 5 in 5 games, or I'm sorry, 5 points. I don't know how I got 5 points, but I must have messed it up in 10 games. But either way, the game looks a little fast for him, but you can see why they like him.
Yeah, you can. And he's another one. I agree with you. I think he's going to need some AHL time just to kind of continue to adjust to guys at a professional size. And that's not to say that there aren't guys who play in the college level who are built like professional NHL players. There are. But he needs some more time just to kind of, he's going to probably follow a path that's very Morgan Frost-like here, I would say, where they would want to put him in a spot where he can see the puck going into the net a little bit more, get those opportunities more frequently, score a few more goals, obviously. And, because he wasn't able to find the net in his first few games at the NHL level. And that was certainly not a knock. I mean, he was around it for a lot of it. He almost looked like, the one goal that I think it went to Joel Farabee, but he was right there. It could have been his goal easily if it would have just rolled in a second earlier. And Farabee finished it off for him. And, nonetheless, you're seeing how he has the nose for the net. So I don't have any worries about him continuing to develop into the player that they hope he can be and being a successful player. I just think he needs that time to be able to have some success at the minor league level and then see how it translates as it goes forward. But I don't have a doubt in my mind anyway that we'll definitely see him at the NHL level next year. I think he's going to start in the minors, but I think absolutely at some point in time he's going to do enough to earn a call up somewhere in the middle of that year, and we'll see when that is, how early that is, see whether he follows kind of the Joel Farabee path where, all it takes is 10 minor league games and you're going, all right, let's bring him back because, things were going really well and he's played at the NHL level before. So let's give him another go. Or the other way around. Maybe it takes half the year, 3/4 of a year, and he's more of a later addition, but I don't have any doubts in my mind that we'll be seeing him again at some point next season.
Yeah. It seems like he needs to get a little stronger. A lot of these college kids have played more hockey in a more condensed period, and that's part of the adjustment as well. So Igor Zamula was up for 10 games. It seems like there is a case of a guy who has the NHL head, AHL or ECHL body, and that needs to bring that along. And he's the type, but they call the ectomorph, more of a thin, longer build. It's going to take some time, but you can see the skill.
Yeah, you can. And, he's an interesting one for me because, and we're going to I know we're going to dive into much more about where the team goes over the offseason and all that stuff. And it's really hard for me to pinpoint, or I should say it's really easy for me to pinpoint a lot of who's going to probably be on the defensive picture come the start of next season. But there's going to be a hole somewhere in there, and I just can't put him there definitively or pencil him in as the guy who they'll look to, not without some significant growth in the offseason anyway. I mean, if he came into camp and is 10 pounds heavier and looks more muscle and looks more physical and plays the part, then by all means he could be a player for the NHL as early as the start of next year, but I just don't know that that's going to happen. I think he's going to need not just more time in the minors to continue to adjust to that size and physicality, but I think he needs to stay on the ice a little more consistently too, because the injuries just have kept creeping in for him. So I think he needs to be able to do that a lot too. And that'll determine how quickly he kind of comes up and solidifies his spot at the NHL level, because I think he can be an NHL player. It's just taking, I think as kind of expected, because, he's another one of these undrafted guys. So probably as expected, it's taking a little bit of time. It's a work in progress, diamond in the rough kind of thing, but you got to work at it. And he's going to have a crucial offseason for himself here, where he's got to continue to take all those steps and do the things necessary to really get on their radar come next year, because I think down the stretch, he was playing more out of necessity than he was by choice. And, that's where things are going to be important for him, because you don't want it to be a necessity where they call him up just because there's not enough bodies. You want him to be the guy in the lineup because they want him in the lineup, because he's one of the top 6 guys. And right now he's not. So he's got some work to do.
Yeah. You want these guys to earn it and to force the Flyers' hand instead of, like you just described, it's not the best situation. And since the Flyers' development model has been a subject of criticism, and I think rightfully so, all more to that point, a player who is on the radar, maybe straddling the fence right now, maybe in his last chance with the Philadelphia organization, maybe someone like Isaac Ratcliffe looked actually better as an NHL player than in the AHL. What do you think is at work there with him, and what do you think what regard they hold him?
Yeah, he's a really interesting one, because, when you're trying a lot of players at the end of the year like they were, and, you've got all these pieces that are just moving all over the place, he didn't get another look after that little sample that we got. And it's a little surprising. He had a decent year, all things considered. I say decent. I'm not saying he, tore it up in the AHL, because he definitely had better moments as an NHL player than he did more often as an AHL player, which it just kind of blows my mind, because he should be having those moments as an AHL player. He should be one of the, kind of at this point, one of the biggest and toughest guys to move from the front of the net and play that style of game as an AHL player. And it just doesn't seem to happen with regularity for him. So, I hope he's still on their radar a little bit, because the potential is still there. But, you got to admit the time's running out for him at some point, because eventually, kind of like we've seen with some of these other higher picks that they've made, early second rounders or things like that, there comes a time when you have to make a call on those guys. And, the next wave of guys like that are going to be coming up eventually. I mean, it's not going to be much longer before the guys like Isaac Ratcliffe are out of the picture, and we're focused in on, in addition to a later first rounder like Tyson Forster, we're into the Zayd Wisdoms and Elliot Desnoyers of the world, because they're going to graduate from the, junior play, and they're going to turn into pros too. And when they turn pro, are guys like that going to be basically leapfrogging over a guy like Ratcliffe and taking his spot if there's one available when the time comes? That's what you got to start to watch for. And that can eventually play into whether or not he's got a future in the organization. So that's kind of where I am with him, that you got to kind of watch out for that. He's got to really put his best foot forward before it's too late.
Yeah, I just hope he doesn't turn out to be like a Pat Maroon, where, big, tall guy, takes him a while. Maroon had skating issues, because I think it was a roller hockey, started out in roller hockey, but regardless, with the injuries that Ratcliffe had. So that, I tell you, he had a certain element the Flyers could really use. Yeah. Maybe he can make some hay in training camp and make a good impression to continue his career in Philadelphia. And finally, we'll wrap it up with a player we know they think is an NHL player. He finally came to the fore, but he's not sure if he's going to be a center or a winger. His name's Morgan Frost, and he's the center of a lot of controversy. What say you?
Yeah, it's going to be a big year for him to me. I mean, he's another one of these guys who needs to start producing with more consistency. And I'm not trying to make it all about production for him. I thought he took some steps in terms of the way he handles himself in games. There were plenty of games where I saw him where, he's not necessarily a liability defensively, but he's not scoring either, and he kind of just falls into the middle. And there's nights where that's okay. He can be that guy some nights, and it doesn't hurt you. It doesn't help you offensively, but somebody else will pick him up and and they'll find a way to do things. And there were times where he had the flashes of, look at the skill player that he is, look at the playmaker, and that's the guy who put up all the points in juniors, and we know all about that too. I just think that, I think everybody needs to get on the same page with him collectively as an organization. Pick a position for him, stick with it, leave him there, and let him just ride it out however it will go. Do you want him to take faceoffs and be a center and have all the defensive responsibilities of a center? Do you want to try to unlock his offensive abilities a little more by saying he's a winger? I kind of liked the dynamic that they had at one point in time. I think the line combination, Noah Cates was playing on a wing, and they had Frost down the middle, and Tippett was on the other wing.
Right.
And I kind of liked that dynamic. I thought that line had probably the most potential we've seen from a young trio in a while. And maybe that's the direction to go with him. Maybe that's where you get the best of both worlds for him, where he plays a responsible game down the middle, but also was able to contribute because he's got two guys around him. Again, I don't think Cates is necessarily going to light things up offensively, but Cates had a nose for the net, and Tippett's got the shot, and Frost is the playmaker. And sometimes, you take those three kind of contrasting styles and they gel together really well, and they find a way to work. So I think that that's the type of direction for him. I don't have a preference for him in terms of position. I think he can play both. It's just a matter of, I think, sticking with one, because I got tired at the end of the year of the back and forth. He's on the wing this night, he's back at center the next night, and they're just moving pieces around. I think for him, you got to stick with it. I think that finally, especially down the stretch, one of the things I agreed with in some of the assessment that some of the, whether it was Mike Yo or others were making about his game, I think finally everything from the shoulder injury and the amount of time that he missed was finally starting to kind of drift away and be part of the past for him. He was finally showing a little more consistency in his play. He still has to clean up a lot of stuff, though, too. I mean, he has some pretty bad turnovers that I can't get over. I mean, they're fundamental to me, and that's something he's got to clean up. But there were plenty of nights where defensively he's perfectly adequate. He's doing his job exactly the way he should, but you just want that little extra from him. And I think that, as a first-round pick, too, this kind of comes with the territory. The expectations are higher for him. He wasn't exactly your average first round pick in the sense that he goes later in the first round. So yes, some of the expectations on those later first rounders needs to be curbed, but then he tore up juniors as a point producer. And I think that gave people the idea that he can be both. He can be the all around forward that they need, that gives you a good amount of points, but also plays a responsible game defensively. And he's obviously he's not going to be Sean Couturier because the size difference is noticeable. But if you could get a guy who eventually, plays the defensive style the right way and follows that career trajectory where defensively it's there and offensively it starts showing up with more consistency, I think people would love it if Morgan Frost became what people expect out of Sean Couturier numbers wise, which is a 30-70 kind of guy. But he's got a long way to go to get to that because, he just hasn't done it with any consistency from an offensive standpoint. But I do think it's there. And I hope that he continues to take the steps necessary to be that player, because I think he's like Owen Tippett. He's kind of graduated from the AHL, and now it's time to, basically time to put up or shut up, because you don't have much of a future if this is consistently what you're going to be collectively, offensively and defensively as a player, where there's still mistakes on the defensive end that you can clean up. There's still consistency issues with the production. He needs to really completely turn that around and take a big stride next year, in my opinion.
Yeah, he still has a little bit of junior in his game. Mm-hmm. There's a little flash that maybe just is a little excess at this level, but the dynamic element, which they really lack at center, is something he can bring. The playmaking ability, the vision on the ice. So you really hope that that'll work out. But, Kevin, it really brings us to the elephant in the room, and that is listening to Chuck Fletcher yesterday. You had a fine piece this morning about it, and I'm going to make some brief comments, and then I'll let you go because because I know you have a lot to say about it. I think a lot of what Chuck had to say yesterday was counter programming from what they said in January. It was to kind of control that aggressive retool and kind of shape and, focus that in a different direction, because it really sent a bad signal. I don't think I don't know if it was you or somebody else that we had on the show, to just say, hey, we're desperate, aggressive retool, blank checkbook. That wasn't the verbiage you would expect from Chuck Fletcher. And of course, it came from Dave Scott. So now Chuck is out there on his own, and he is trying to manage expectations. And I think a lot of what we saw yesterday, some of it was logical and straightforward, but a lot of it was to try and deal with the hangover from the January press conference. What say you?
Yeah, there's a lot to kind of go into with this whole thing because, I know people listen to what he has to say and, there's steam coming out of their ears before he has finished the first sentence because you just don't want to hear it anymore. And I totally get that. I didn't think that he said anything totally egregious in the press conference per se, because there was a heavy focus on younger players, which I respect. I think that that's partially a direction you need to go. Look, development's a problem in this organization. You've struggled to get the high end talent, and let's put it this way: you had the best opportunity for high end talent landed in your lap now 5 years ago, and you wasted it. The guy's no longer part of your team, so that's just the way it goes. And it's hard when you look at former players who were part of something big that may have happened over the course of, say, that 5-year period. You think about a guy like Braden Shen who's playing in St. Louis, that for a lot of people, they'll never get over that trade, because look at where Braden Shen is playing in a playoff series with the St. Louis Blues. Look where the Flyers are, still lacking a high-end talent guy, and look at what Braden Shen's producing every single year. That's a hard dynamic to follow. So I didn't think he said anything egregious when it came to talking about young players and and talking about things that could be a little different next year. But my problem with what he was saying, or the direction that you're going, is that, look, to me, when you're in a spot where this is as crucial of an offseason as you can have, and for Chuck Fletcher especially, because, to me, there's no turning back from this. I mean, he's entering the final year of his contract, and that's, this is it. You either put it together and start turning it around the right direction, or I don't think you see the end of the final year of that contract. I think that you're the next guy in line, because, and the thing about, and I know, because I know that there's people, like, I've gotten, I don't know how many different messages from people who the first thing that they want to see happen as part of the offseason, or wanted to see happen, was, oh, you know what, if Chuck's going to speak, the last thing he should do is announce his resignation, do this. Like, they don't want him to be part of this franchise anymore, and I understand where they're coming from. The problem is that that's not realistic at this point in time, because they would not put him in front of the media to give a post-mortem on the season and talk about where they go from here and a coaching search and all of that stuff if he wasn't going to be part of the group that's making those decisions. So he's here. This is going to be his thing. Because to me, if you were going to make that kind of move and say, you know what, we have to turn the page and start a new chapter, and it was going to involve, the inevitable coaching change that we knew was kind of coming from January, from that January press conference, we knew that Mike Yeo was pretty much a dead man walking and all that type of stuff. Then the easy thing to do was, at that given point in time, halfway through the year, you're in the middle of a franchise record losing streak. You pull the plug on that guy too, and you find the guy who you want to make the calls, not just for the next coach and this offseason, but you let that guy also handle the biggest decision you had for the rest of this regular season to start the process of turning the page, which was the Claude Giroux trade.
Right.
And from the second that you let Chuck Fletcher do that, you're letting him handle the whole offseason. So everybody who wanted to see, oh, hopefully Chuck Fletcher gets fired, hopefully he just steps down, they change something up, whatever. I think that the writing was already on the wall that nothing was going to happen there from the second that you let him handle the Claude Giroux trade. Once he was in on that, there's no change coming. This is his team for this offseason. So everything falls into his lap as far as I'm concerned with whatever goes on. So he's going to be on the hot seat, no question. The problem I have is, and this is what I wrote this morning. I just don't get the sense that there's a plan. I don't know what the plan is, and I don't know that they know what the plan is, because there's a lot of stuff going into next year to me that is completely rooted in hope. he's going to get up there and talk about hoping that Sean Couturier, Ryan Ellis, and Kevin Hayes are all good to go and stay healthy for the whole year and give you what's expected. And you can, is it possible that happens? Sure it is. It's possible that Sean Couturier gives you the 30 goals and 70, 75 points and plays 80 out of 82. It's possible that Ryan Ellis comes back from whatever happened this year and all of that, that multi-layered injury that he talked about, to use his words, and comes back and becomes part of this team like they hoped he would be this year, and gives you his typical offensive production and gives you the defensive play that he became known for in Nashville. And it's possible that Kevin Hayes gives you the production that you expect. I mean, Kevin Hayes, I think actually, as much as he played through injury for much of the year and it was noticeable, it was admirable, his point production, when all things were said and done, because I think he played 48 games this year and finished with 31 points, which is pretty darn good when you're not 100% and you're still finding a way to produce in certain areas.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So good for him that he was able to try to play through it and maybe now can come out on the other side, because I saw better from him in the second half of the season. But to look at those three players and look, like, that's why I'm saying, no doubt, if those guys play full-length seasons, don't have injury issues, play up to their full potential as they've been, and the expectations that we hold for those players as veterans, knowing what they can deliver, sure, the Flyers are a better team with all three of those guys playing to full potential. But that's an awful lot to hope for when, Sean Couturier has had 2 years where he hasn't been completely healthy at this point and is struggling to stay on the ice and is coming back from a pretty significant injury. And Ryan Ellis was completely missing in action this past year, gave you 4 games, came back too early from the injury. Now it was a multi-layered injury and he's not having surgery. So hopefully he's ready for training camp, but you can't bank on that. And same thing with Hayes at this point, because Hayes was out 4 different times this year, 3-4 different times this year. Like, you can't bank on a guy's health being perfect moving forward forever. So that's the first thing that a lot of hope was based on, was hopefully these 3 players who definitely make them a better team stay healthy for the whole year. Well, more power to you if you think that's the way it's going to be, but the track record doesn't look very good right now. And then it becomes hope with the young players. Hope that their development kind of takes that next step, and it's fair to hope that, and it's fair to want to see that progression, but where has it been in the past? It's been, we're going on 4 or 5 years for some of these guys and still waiting to see that big jump in production and their level of play and keeping up with these playoff teams that we see kind of come in and out every single night or every other night. And it just needs to, again, you're hoping that they do all these things and that everything goes right and, all that type of stuff. And to me, then what you're also hoping for is you're either hoping that you can manufacture something that makes you a better team, like manufacture a trade, or you're hoping that every move that you make, every signing that you have, or whatever you try to do is a home run. And you're not going to hit home runs 1,000% of the, 1,000 out of 1,000 times. It just doesn't work that way. You're not going to bat 1,000 here with your off-season roster moves. You're going to have situations here where guys just don't perform to the level that you expected them to, and it's unfortunate, but hopefully somebody fills the void there, if it doesn't work out. And that's why every team out there that makes the playoffs has depth at, not just the next level, but 2 levels beyond that. They want to make sure that they have guys that when something doesn't go right, they call up the next guy and he's able to fill in. When somebody does go down with an injury, it doesn't look like there's that much of a difference in talent level, because the next guy could be just as good, or the next guy who's going to come up and just start his career is starting a career where that player is going to be just as good as the one that he's replacing. It's that kind of thing. And I just don't sense that there's a plan with that, because of the fact that hope is not a plan. It's not. It's just throwing stuff against the wall and hoping that it sticks. And that's what I gathered that they did last season. Last offseason was make a lot of moves and see what they could throw at the wall that sticks. And I don't want to say that every single move was a bust. I liked the Cam Atkinson acquisition, and I thought he brought something to the team as a veteran. But, was Rasmus Ristolainen a great player? He was okay. Keith Yandel obviously didn't work out. Martin Jones was a little better than expected, but not perfect by any stretch. And then obviously your biggest one was the Ryan Ellis trade, which so far turned into nothing because you got 4 games out of him. So you're hoping that everything that you do is going to stick and be part of the repair plan, and that's not a sustainable plan. And that's kind of where my issue was, is that there's no roadmap or blueprint for this right now. At least when, and I'm not trying to make comparisons or try to say that the team is in the exact same spot as they were 7-8 years ago or something like that, but at least, at the start of things with Ron Hextall, there was a blueprint. You got the sense, you understood the importance of the draft picks, you understood the importance of patience with prospects, and it was laid out that way. It's going to take a few years, but this is what's going to build the team. And now there's this, his description of what he considers an aggressive retool. To sit there and talk about it like that, where it's an aggressive approach to everything. You can be as aggressive as you want to, in my opinion. It doesn't mean that, the one guy that you sign with some of the extra money you have in free agency magically makes you a contender again. And not only that, but the other thing I would add to this is that, again, one of the things I threw into the article was every team in the Eastern Conference that made the playoffs this year made the playoffs by getting 100 points, which is substantial to me because, for one, the next lowest team, the first team out of the playoffs in the East, I think finished with 86 points, I believe.
Yeah.
Which, maybe things would be different. I don't want to discount, the things could have been different for the New York Islanders had, they had some normal structure to their schedule. Starting on the road for as long as they did was kind of an unfair advantage for the rest of the league, and they never really recovered from that slow start. But don't you feel like a team that's can look and say 14 points out of that final playoff spot when it's all said and done, okay, that's 7 games difference, 7 games that go the other direction, and maybe that gets you those extra points. Maybe those 7 games come against a team where you steal the points back, and so that's how you swing it all back, or however you want to look at it.
Plus, you have somewhat of a winning track record in the recent past. I mean,
that too, absolutely.
We got 3 out of 4 seasons where they have been worse every bad season.
Right. And the other thing too for me is you can look at a team that finishes that short out of the playoffs, even though it looks like a larger margin, and go, okay, it's 7 wins one way or 7 games one way or the other. And maybe you find a way to start making those up in some way and stealing them somehow and all that type of stuff. The Flyers finished with 61 points, and they were 39 out of a playoff spot. That you're talking 20 games now. I mean, that's a quarter of your season that you've got to try to account for that needed to go the opposite direction for you to even make the playoffs. And that's the other issue I have with the way that it all sounds is, okay, an aggressive approach is I'm not going to sit there and say you don't want to have your general manager for a franchise that is, that is as proud of its history and the amount of times they make the playoffs and all that stuff. You want the Philadelphia Flyers to be aggressive because that's always what they were known for, was being aggressive in the approach. I don't think anybody's afraid of that aspect of it. But I think what they don't like about the aggression is not just about being aggressive to try to get back to the playoffs, but that sounds like the end goal get back to the playoffs. There's nothing wrong with being aggressive in an offseason and saying, we're being aggressive because we want to be a contender. We want to go out and get all of the pieces that are necessary to be a successful NHL team. And, making the play, like one of the things that I talked about at one point in time, I was just kind of casually was, you want to be the Colorado Avalanche right now, where, what, every year you go into the start of the year and at the very least, you're thinking you're one of the final 8. And then, from there, whatever happens, happens. You're one of the final 8. Strange things happen in the playoffs. You don't always make the final 4 or the final 2, and you definitely don't always stand at the top of the mountain at the end of the year. But you're not just in the dance. You're there to be more than just a participant. You're there to compete, and you're there to put up a good fight before you end up knocked out of the playoffs in the second round in the conference finals, wherever it ends. They haven't, outside of that one magical year, which is the outlier of the last decade at this point, they have done nothing more than try to get into the playoffs and make the tournament and then hope to get lucky. And again, it kind of comes right back to the hope is not a plan. You either are going to be a really good team that can win games in the playoffs, or you're not. You're going to be a pretender to me. And, I see these teams. I've watched the playoffs, as early as it is right now, only a handful of games have been played. I've watched these teams that go out there and have already this season, and experiences that I've had watching the team in person, skate circles around the Flyers because they're that high level of skill and speed and everything else that there is, to come with the total package. Everything about those teams has just ramped up in the playoffs. They are even more energetic. They're even faster. They're even more skilled. And, I look at Colorado, and I don't want to keep harping on Colorado as the only team that I lean on here, but I saw the very first goal of the game that Nathan McKinnon scores, and I saw the goal that Cale Makar scores, and I look and I go, that's beyond regular season performance at that point, because that's done with even more conviction than it was in the regular season. That those two goals that they scored really early on in game one of that series are the announcement that it's go time. And
yeah,
they're there.
That's bleep you kind of goals, right?
Oh yeah. And that was the thing, from breakup day and all that stuff with the players. That was the thing, those types of things are the things I respected about Cam Atkinson, and Scott Lawton said similar things. And I liked what even Travis Sanheim was talking about it a little bit. The idea that, what happens this year and happened last year and, all that type of stuff, though, that's embarrassing when you have expectations that go with, or that go against what the performance was. That I think is where the embarrassment lies. I don't think anybody's, again, I've said this before when I've talked to you guys, it's, I don't think people would be disappointed with a team that doesn't make the playoffs if that was the expectation that was laid out. Like, hey, listen, it's a rebuilding team. They're in the middle of this kind of thing. They're not going to make the playoffs, and that's okay, because the year after they should be better for it. They should have even more clarity about the ways that they could now bolster what has emerged as pieces that stick. That's kind of, to me, how you build the thing, is that, okay, that's why I have no problem with Chuck Fletcher talking about the young guys. If you want to stick with Noah Cates and Morgan Frost and Owen Tippett for another year, and the expectations are low, but you're going to see what sticks, then the next year you come out of it with even more clarity. You come out of it with maybe some more money and say, okay, now how do we address the areas that aren't good? And how does the draft dictate that too? Who have you drafted in the last couple of years when those things happen that also become part of the picture and don't cost a lot of money because they're on entry level deals? I don't want to jump the gun here on anything, but because we don't know where the Flyers are picking specifically in the first round. But what if they did win the lottery? And what if that you're getting a Shane Wright? Well, then that becomes a piece of your future that you factor in at that point. That's exactly what the New York Rangers had to do. When the New York Rangers magically land Capo Caco and Alexis Lafreniere, you start to factor that into the picture, because you go, okay, that's part of the rebuilding plan. We get those guys too. That you didn't have to go out and do anything to acquire them. You got the spot in the lottery and you just made your pick. That's all that you did. And then you left the rest to them. And on top of what you were able to do, and the Rangers are a little bit of an outlier in this, because the Rangers did, got some breaks in the way that they were able to build it. It's nice when you get a future Norris winning defenseman who goes, the only place I'm going to play is New York. It's nice when one of the big name free agents says the only place I'm going to play is New York.
Right,
that's
Panarin and Trouba, right. There were two of them, really, yeah.
Yeah, really, basically. But and not only that, but I'm also talking about Adam Fox there too, as the Norris guy, because he dictated that as well. And you get to throw them in with established veterans that were always part of the picture. Your Zibanejad's and Kreiders and all that type of stuff. And that's how you see how it starts to evolve. And that to me is the way to build it. And the Rangers got fast tracked. Don't get me wrong, but the Flyers needed to take that kind of path, or at least kind of have that sort of plan. Hey, we can build it this way, see what we have in the younger players as we continue. Like, I think that everybody was on page a little bit, as much as everybody wanted this season over with, because it's hard to watch 41 games when you're out of the playoff picture. You wanted to see what the kids had in the end, right? Because
that was the only reason to watch. That was the only reason to watch.
Exactly. It gave you something to look at and say, okay, how do those pieces, how do any of them, and that's why, it's why I'm so confident coming out and saying I don't envision the team next year without Noah Cates on it, because he showed me that much to say, okay, he's not your star. He's not going to be high-end talent that transforms your team, but he's exactly the type of player you need at the middle to bottom six of the lineup, that third line kind of role. He's exactly the type of player you need. And if he grows from what he already is, then the sky's the limit for him in that kind of role. He's very much, I don't want to say he's exactly this player because I don't think he has the physical edge, but he's got some Scott Lawton in him. And I would love to see him play with Scott Lawton in that particular role because I think that that's where they both fit the best. But you don't have that luxury when you're missing so many. You lack the high-end talent, so you don't get to put those players up there. You have to play Scott Lawton on a second line, or you have to play a guy with virtually no NHL experience on a second line because that's the only way you're going to even get a sample of what he is. So those are the types of things for me that make it a lack of a plan because there's so much of it that's rooted in hope and so much of it that is, not going to progressively move the team forward next year that I wonder, and then that, the other part of it for me is where Chuck Fletcher sits, because if he's on the hot seat and he's only got a year left on the contract and all that type of stuff, then you're starting all over if you make the decision to not have him be the decision maker. One of the lines I wrote in the article doesn't just involve him. It involves a lot of people because I kind of called it, you can have too many cooks in the kitchen here, where there's too many voices that are trying to probably tell you what direction to go. And that's why I don't think they have a good plan either, because, which side are you taking? Do you want to, or you got people who are probably telling you to be the tougher team, get more toughness. You need more high end ability. You need to play the kids. You need to go out and be aggressive. Like, that's so many voices that just come in to try to tell you what direction to go. And that just keeps your wheels spinning, in my opinion. So that's the challenge that they face coming out of all of that type of stuff from the entry of the offseason, if you will, to start this thing off. And, even down to, I had people who were commenting on stuff going, they've known since, we'll say since January, but there's a lot of people that kind of felt, I guess, over the last month or so as the winning didn't kind of pick up even with younger players in the lineup. Okay, a coaching change is going to happen. How do they still have to put together the ideal candidate profile and start that now?
5 or 6 weeks, Kev. Didn't you listen?
Oh, I know. I heard what he said. It's just a matter of, there's a lot of people going, how do they not have a list? Well, because this is how they're doing things right now. Because there's, and I guarantee you that as they try to go through that process, there's going to be multiple voices that are part of the search committee, if you will, that are going to offer a take on what kind of coach they need. And I think I've expressed it with you guys before, and it just to reiterate it, if I haven't, the last thing I want is to see a guy who comes in who's top 15 and wins all time, because that's the coach to me that you hire when you're trying to give a team a kick in the rear end that isn't performing to the expectations and say, go pick it up. You got to
like Laviolette was in 2010.
Exactly. I think that especially in 2010, because I think when Laviolette came in, you're looking at the young core, the Carter Richards type group. You're looking at and Briere was still younger at that point. He was a veteran, but he was still he still had 4 or 5 more years to go before his career was over.
Right.
You're looking at the vets like Chris Pronger being part of that team, and collectively for everybody it was pick it up. You can be a better team than this. And that's where a coach like that comes in. And, I sense that, like, I look at the types of teams that have coaches like that, even actively right now, Laviolette in Washington, or, at this point, Mike Sullivan's kind of building that reputation in Pittsburgh.
Sutter in Calgary.
Sutter in Calgary is a great example. You think about what the Rangers did after they kind of got all those nice little pieces that they were working towards, and it took about 2 to 3. It took 2 to 3 years, and all of a sudden David Quinn's out, and here comes Gerard Gallant. It's like, and that it signaled to me an indication that the Rangers knew where they were, and it was time to pick it up. So I don't want a coach like that for the Flyers. I wouldn't want to have a coach like that. I would want to have a coach that's more built to be a developmental type of guy, and I think that Yo had some of those qualities. But obviously, you need a guy who comes in and knows how to push guys who have been around for a while too. I know that there's going to be some names that are floating around. I mean, to be honest, one of the names I've heard less frequently than others that, in terms of, because I see enough of these things where there's people who write up their, these are top 5 coaching candidates to watch and things like that. And it doesn't really have as much intel. It's just, here's names to watch.
Right.
One of the names that I've even seen left out on those that I think needs to be in the conversation is actually David Quinn. I think that's a name that needs to be in the conversation, because I think he fits the bill. I think that he would come in and be able to kind of take the things that he's doing actively now. I mean, last year, his coaching career has been the U.S. team. He was coaching the Olympic team, and he's coaching the team at Worlds now.
Right.
And, I think that for the type of team that he was on previously when he was coaching the Rangers, a lot of young players were part of that group. And it's kind of, you see how, I see similarities to the Rangers of 3 years ago and the Flyers of now to an extent, and go, the Flyers aren't going to magically get all of those substantial pieces overnight, but they have a lot of young players. And I think a coach like that allows you to have that type of style and kind of curbs the expectations. This is a developmental team, not a contending team. I feel the same way if they were to go out and get a Jim Montgomery. I think that
right.
would be very similar. But these lists that are coming out, and I'm not trying to downplay the fact that this is not, I don't want to downplay the possibility of it, because it is a possibility. It's definitely a rumbling within the Flyers organization. But I think that if they went out and made the decision that the best coaching candidate for them right now and here and now is John Tortorella or something like that, I think they're making a huge mistake. That's just where I'm at with it. I think that it would be a huge mistake at this given point in time to bring a coach like that in, as opposed to, I don't want to make it sound like, like even Rick Tockett's a better option than Tortorella at this point. And I don't love Tocchet the coach. I think that, I love his insight when he's on television. I don't know that it always translates the best as a coach. But even he's a better option right now, just because I don't get the sense that with him behind the bench that your expectations are sky high. I think that you change the game when you bring in, and I'm thinking of the other coaching free agents that are out there. You bring in a Tortorella, you bring in a Paul Maurice, I think that just sends your expectations way higher than what this team's ability is.
Yeah.
And it's a mistake to me.
Yeah, Kevin, let me just interject here, because
sure.
I want to backtrack, because what you said about the Flyers being almost 40 points out of a playoff spot, and in each successive year, like in 19, in 21, and now in 22, this to me, following this team for 52 years, is the worst season in team history relative to expectations. Sure, in 07, they had 56 points. There was probably less talent, but I've never seen anything like this. And the idea that if all these things happen and these guys are healthy, so what are they go from 61 to 81 points? I mean, how much of an improvement can you make, given the fact that Claude Giroux is not coming back, likely? Mm-hmm. I don't see that at all, really. So I think they're fooling themselves to think that they can go back in history. And we were talking about this before the show, mm-hmm. and Chuck Fletcher refers to, it's going to be a very similar offseason to 2019. Well, when he gets done paying these kids, he has to pay
mm-hmm.
Tippett, Frost, and if he wants McEwen, people are higher on him than I am. I mean, I like the guy. I love his effort. Not a lot of talent. They're only going to have about $5 million. So they're going to have to lose a contract, or they're going to make a bad trade. I mean, they are really, I think they're delusional if they think they're going to have any kind of season where 2020 is possible again. And to me, it represents Chuck Fletcher trying to redefine, when he kept referring to aggressive and kept getting asked, like I said earlier, he's trying to redefine what that meant, because he wasn't the guy saying it originally.
Yeah, so it's a great point, because the fact that, to me, when I look at that 19 offseason, there's two things that stand out. And obviously, number one is the fact that your team coming into the picture is already different, and it's fun. It's fundamentally different from the second that Claude Giroux is not part of the team.
That's right.
He was the leader then. He would be the leader now, and obviously, like, the whole Claude Giroux discussion is totally different if the season goes differently. If you're at January and they're in playoff contention and things are going modestly well, there's no conversation about whether or not he's being traded at that moment. Everybody knew what his fate was, though, because as soon as things got out of hand, it was, basically at that point, you knew it was going to be time at some point. So, that wasn't a shock, obviously. And then you look at the three, to me, at least, I go back to the three big moves that were made coming into that particular offseason, or going into that particular season, in the offseason of 19. They go out and they make the trade. They get Matt Niskanen. They made the trade to get Justin Braun. And they made the trade to get Kevin Hayes' rights and then signed him. And it goes right back to the thing about the hope is not a plan thing, because you couldn't have asked for a better result from all three of those guys in year one. Everything was a home run that particular offseason, and that's just how luck would have it. Kevin Hayes gave you one of the best years he's ever had, and then you watched as Matt Niskanen not only played a solid game, but brought out the best in Ivan Provorov, his partner, and Justin Braun looked pretty solid on the back end as well, and all of a sudden, you got everything lining up. You got a goaltender. You've got defensive players who are playing much better and veteran defensive players who are playing much better. You seemed like you had solidified your centerman position because of the way that Hayes was playing at the time. And you're going, this is great. Everything lines up. Everything's working. But that's not how it usually works. And even playoff teams don't usually get that kind of luck in most situations. Playoff teams usually earn it because of the fact, and look no further to me than even a team. It's funny because like one of the things I laugh about, like you just said, bringing what if all this stuff that they try to do brings their point total up, let's say 20 points, and they're in the 81 range now and things like that.
That's Columbus, yeah.
Well, and that's Columbus now. And see, to me, my thing is that you could even get as close as possible to the playoffs, maybe even where a last team would make it in or something like that. Imagine, do you want to be the last team that made it in the Western Conference this year? Like, one of the funniest quotes that came out over the course, from around the NHL the entire season was when Darryl Sutter turned around and said, why would you want to play the Colorado Avalanche in round one? It would be a waste of 8 days. How do you think Nashville feels after the first game of that series, looking at the way that went? And yet somehow or other, I still came away watching the end of that game going, look at Matt Duchene out there busting it for the whole 60, even though the game's out of reach. Like, Look at him going out there and playing a hard game and not giving in and trying to put his best out there, even though they're out of it. That's the attitude that you want to see. And then on top of it, do you want to be that team that goes, well, okay, you know what, at the end of the day, Nashville kind of gets the brunt of the jokes here in some ways because of the fact that they get joked about all the time for the, kind of the banner thing that happens. Whatever. Do you want to be the team that's raising a banner every year going, hey, listen, we participated in the Stanley Cup playoffs. That was great. No, you want to be raising banners for division titles and making it to the Stanley Cup final or winning the Stanley Cup. You don't want to be just celebrating participation. You want to be celebrating competing for something and making it to a certain point in the playoff picture one way or the other where you're making enough noise that everybody around the league is talking about you. You want to be, you want to be Colorado. You want to be where Calgary is right now. You want to be Carolina. You want to be the New York Rangers. You want to be all of those teams. And I didn't even get to the ones that are the obvious choices out of the East. You want to be Florida, talked about, Tampa, Toronto. Right. You want to be all of that. And you're not even close to that right now. And the thought that you could be just by being aggressive, it quite frankly is delusional and I thought that was, there was a lot of delusion in what was said back in that January press conference. There was still some of that, here. I thought that what Chuck Fletcher did this time around was turn the page a little bit more towards younger players and, which I think is actually more of a byproduct of what you brought up, which is the cap space issue. They've got really no room to work with. There's only, at this point, there's only two ways I can see where they have the ability to free up some money. And number one's going to be probably a move that'll come down the pipe soon enough, which is whatever happens with the future of James Van Riemsdyk. Whatever his future is, that'll free up some money somewhere. But they've also got to go out and try to figure out, A, what the best method is, and B, what they can actually pull off when it comes to his future. Because, look, you can do the easy thing and buy him out, and it'll cut the contract about in half for this year. So the cap hits about half. And then the following year, you have some dead money that's going to carry over, which is going to be a burden on you the following year. Or you can try to find a trade partner if there's one out there and, go by all means for that 1 year, since it would only last 1 year if you can actually find a trade partner for the contract, eat 25% of the salary. What do I care if you're taking $2.5 million for that 1 year and it's gone and there's no buyout penalty, there's no nothing, and you still got some of the cap relief. That's the one way to do it. And then the other way that they could possibly add more money is the only other way that I can think is by actually making a trade that involves a player with term and cap, which at this point in time, the options are limited, I would say, because it didn't sound exactly like they were interested in moving on from a lot of other players. So I think that you're talking about how creative can you get with an off season. It just doesn't sound like any form of a sustainable plan whatsoever.
No, it doesn't. And there's this three amigos that everybody's been talking about in terms of trade chips that the Flyers have, and TK, Provy, and Sanheim. And Elliot Friedman has been kind of hinting over the last couple 32 Thought podcasts before the playoffs started anyway, about there may be something going on with Provorov where he has been a little extra sensitive this year. In fact, I have some inside that it goes beyond that. He's a very frustrated young man and has been most of this season. And I think a lot of the fans feel like he's not that alpha dog that he was drafted to be in 2015. He's a good, solid player, probably more of a second pair defenseman. But if you put him with a really good player, just like Matt Carl was with Chris Pronger, Matt Carl looked fine if he had Chris Pronger as a partner. I think that's where Provorov is at. But it does look like, or it does seem as if the way Friedman works generally, in my experience, when he's throwing out that many hints that there might be something going on there, and he could be, Ivan Provorov could be a player the Flyers look to either acquire some insurance, which I think they definitely need in case Ryan Ellis can't make it back, or just to address another issue, a position on the team.
Yeah, it's a really tough one for me because I get that same sense, and I think that he kind of showed his colors there with the response and is an expert and you grade me however you want to because my opinion doesn't matter kind of thing.
Right.
I didn't love that response because of the fact that, I'm not at all trying to sit there and say the guy isn't allowed to vent about his year. He is. He had a bad year. The whole team had a bad year. You're allowed to be frustrated. I think everybody is frustrated anyway. You're allowed to be. But I got this sense that like the question that I asked and I put this in my article after all of the breakup day type stuff with the players anyway, if that's the response to just a general question from the media, what's the response to adversity and criticism and accountability within the room? We're not, as media members, we haven't been privy to that type of stuff in a long time where we actually get to kind of read the room a little bit after a game. So what's the response like there when he's getting, when somebody out there, because you got to imagine that at some point stuff comes to a head when you're losing games with regularity, that someone's going to sit there and say, what, why are you doing that? Or this, pointing out a critique in a game or trying to have hold a player accountable, what's the response like there? So that was my question to that. The hard part for me, because I don't doubt that they would look for, I don't think they would just trade him easily. I think that they would need to be completely floored by an offer, and it would have to solve some significant problems. It would either have to give you an incredibly high-end forward or directly replace everything that Ivan Provorov is, which is the 25 minutes a night and kind of the all-around ability, and I say that because we've seen him play with all-around ability before, so he's got the talent. It's just a matter of right now, I think for him it's the mentality, because I think when you're losing this often and you're frustrated this much, it just throws your whole game off and you don't play with any sense of confidence. So that's the first part is that would be what it would take for them to even say, let's make the trade. The reason why I keep having trouble with it, and I lump him into the group that there is with with the rest of the defensemen, and because I right now, to me, I can pick 5 guys who I have, who I see being part of the blue line core next year just by kind of deductive reasoning. Ivan Provorov's one of them to me because of the fact that Ryan Ellis is, and again, I think that that's a hopeful thing to include him, but if you're going to talk about Ryan Ellis in this way, I don't know why you would trade Ivan Provorov in an offseason where you never got the look that you wanted to have. If this was after an entire year of Ryan Ellis and Provorov's game doesn't take the turn and we don't get to see what they look like playing together, or we do get to see what they look like playing together and it's not good, then I understand why you might be exploring a trade. But you never got that. And so as long as you want to see what these two look like together for more than 4 games, I think that you don't make that trade right now unless you're completely blown away. So I think that they're part of it. And, I know that Travis Sanheim's part of that group too. And I don't know how you trade away a guy who, first of all, to me, was very deserving of the Ashby Trophy because of the fact that I thought he was
the best guy.
He was the most consistent defenseman they had all year, especially in the second half to me. And, you got everything else that lines up with that for him. He was probably the most consistent defenseman. Ristolainen liked playing with them. You extended Ristolainen, so I don't know why you would part that pairing immediately the following offseason. Not only that, but when the players in the room who make the call on who the most improved player of the year is, and that's who they pick, sounds like he's in good standing with the organization. So I don't expect him to be on the move. So there's 4, and the 5th one I would say is Cam York. So now you really only have one other spot to fill in your starting 6. If we're looking at everything, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly here by everything that's been said and pointed out, that would be my guess. I don't want to rule out the fact that something crazy could happen trade-wise because, if you're going to throw out the words aggressive in every area and, we pretty much know the only way you're going to be able to pull that off because you're not going to have tons of money for free agency. And I don't think that you're going to be able to be aggressive doing anything else other than what, trading draft picks, I guess. That's about the only other thing I can think of.
Let me suggest one thing that Chuck Fletcher is not Paul Holmgren.
Right.
Okay. This is my true opinion. Now, I could get a lot of flack for this, but this is really how I feel. And I just come out with it. I think Chuck Fletcher is not exactly doing what he wants to do. If we're up to him, he would dial back expectations like you were saying earlier and talk more about the young players and kind of sit back and see what they do, try to get value free agents, but not really hype up the team. Talk about how we need to take a little bit of a step back in our expectations, let the team come together. He talked about their age distribution chart. The first guy that came to my mind is, listen, 2 guys came to mind. Number one, they made a terrible mistake, in my opinion, re-signing Ristolainen. It was bad enough that you went and got him. I get it. But to double down on that, kind of lock them in. And he's certainly not a replacement for Ryan Ellis. You look at the resources they put out to get Ristolainen, and you say, well, look, a very similar package was sent to Anaheim to get a player like Lindholm, who's a much better player, who is a professional defenseman who makes very good decisions with the puck. That's number one. So already, when he re-signs Ristolainen, he already puts himself at a real disadvantage to try and change things up. Second, I'm looking at Couturier's contract, and I'm saying, with their timeline, if you talk about an age distribution chart, knowing how Couturier, like you said earlier, has had a lot of problems recently staying in the lineup. He's coming off a back surgery, but he's skating already. He looks better. If they really want to get the attention of the fans, they should move that contract and just say, listen, we need to take a step back. I'm not saying this is going to happen. In fact, I think it's got like a 1% chance of happening. But if I'm the GM of the Flyers, that's one of the first moves I'm making because I need to tamp down expectations and I need to get more speed, a more dynamic, younger team. And that would be the move I would make. And without failing that, I don't see how in the world they can do anything beyond hope and pray like we've been talking about most of the night.
Yeah, so that's all. A lot of that's really interesting because I don't necessarily 1,000% agree on Couturier because I do see the value. Now, obviously, the thing that makes that makes a little less sense with Couturier is the fact that you kind of now what it looks like in hindsight is that you jumped the gun on making the contract, or making the extension, because you're obviously when you make that extension last year, you're trying to get ahead of where things are going. You assume that I believe that extension for Couturier was the last thing that they did basically before training camp. And so that comes after everything else that you've done in an off season where you've changed expectations. You think that if everything lines up the way that you draw it up, which, the addition of Ellis, Atkinson being part of the forward group now, Ristolainen was going to drop from being a typical top pairing guy to a middle pairing guy. Provorov's going to look better because he's got a guy like Ellis next, like all that type of stuff. You're making that deal at that time because you're trying to get ahead of what you think is going to be a big year. So that's where, in hindsight, obviously that looks totally different. I 1,000% agree on the Ristolainen contract, because to me, the thing that made no sense about extending him has nothing to do with the player. Like, at the time that they made the extension for Ristolainen, I didn't have, not to say I don't have critiques of the player, I obviously do, but I didn't have a huge problem with the way he was playing. I called it adequate, but the problem with calling his play adequate at that time, and even taking a slight pay cut from what he was making, was that, to me, we knew what kind of changes were going to be in store or needed to be in store for the offseason at that point, and you just cap strapped yourself again with that kind of contract, because that was no small contract. That was no small fill-in piece here that you just, you like what you see. And, not to compare players, but let's just say that Ristolainen is a forward play instead, and was giving you the production that a Derek Brassard was giving you, and he's at that age. He's 27, 28, and you decide, all right, you know what? I don't mind locking myself in for 4 more years with a guy who gives me that kind of production at a couple $1 million for the cap hit. I don't think anybody's complaining about that in a season like this, because you go, okay, fine. It's a piece that you can latch on to moving forward. It would be very, to me, actually, what I'm trying to say is take what Owen Tippett kind of could give you. If Owen Tippett gave you exactly, finished on more of his chances, wouldn't you latch on to a guy, if Tippett was slightly older, had a little bit more experience, had a little bit more of a track record of being the 10 to 15 goal guy? Wouldn't you latch onto that and say, maybe he becomes a 20 goal guy when he's 30, or something like that, whatever. It to me, I just knew that, like, when that contract came out and immediately you were talking about a 5-year deal that spanned, you're looking at $27 million or whatever it turned out to exactly be, that got it to $5.1 million as a cap hit. You're going, right. That's a big chunk of what you had to work with for the offseason. Like, imagine what would happen. And there were 2 things that I didn't like about it at the time, which was, one, you took the money that you would have had in the offseason out of play. And the other thing that I thought you did was, at the time, was there was nothing to me that was more important than draft capital. And you took yourself out of play for that too, because he was a deadline piece that was guaranteed on the move. There's no way that 30 teams around, or I want to say 30, because it would be a shorter list than that, but it would, still, there's no way that at that time, 16 to 20 teams that are in the playoff picture, there's no way they're not looking at a guy who's a right-handed shot defenseman who could potentially help, especially if the Flyers were going to jump in and go, you know what, we'll eat half the salary too, because we don't have anything to lose for the rest of the year, so we'll eat half the salary until it's off the books.
That's a first-round pick.
Right. It could have been. I think they could have recouped the first-round pick, honestly, in that potential spot. But, and who knows what kind of team you turn to for something like that at that time. It wasn't going to be the same market that you were getting when we were talking about Claude Giroux. Right. It was going to be a very different market for a defenseman who brings a physical edge in a game that he claims, that he himself claims is built for playoff hockey. I think that there were a lot of teams that, just like in the offseason, would have wanted to try to go out and try to get a guy like that. And so instead you lost it with that. That's where, what you were trying to say about about what, Chuck Fletcher and maybe his decision making, or having, whether it's all the way he wants it to be. It's a really interesting thought, because that's kind of what I mean by too many cooks in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. It's what when I go down to a game and I'm sitting in the press box and I'm walking around in between periods or whatever it is, I can look down towards the management box at any given point during the season. And there's a really good chance that I'm not only going to find Chuck Fletcher and Brent Flair and Danny Briere, who are all part of it. And I don't really have a problem with that dynamic. Okay, you have a general manager, he's got assistants. They can work in tandem. Everybody pretty much has that kind of thing going for them. But then you start to see the senior advisors who are there. And I don't have issue with Dean Lombardi as a senior advisor. Guy obviously built 2 Stanley Cup champion teams. Right. I think his input can be valuable. But I also see not the GM before Chuck Fletcher, but the GM before the guy who is his predecessor is still hanging around the box.
Mm-hmm.
And the GM before that is still hanging around the box. And I know that their voices are part of the conversation because they wouldn't be in that box and hold the senior advisor position if they weren't. So that's part of what I mean by too many cooks in the kitchen, because, the guy who was making the draft picks in the early 2000s probably still loves the physical guy. And the guy who was making the draft picks and signing guys and making the trades and, when the last time the team made a Stanley Cup final probably is somewhere in between. Stay physical, but, don't forget about, some of the speed and skill, but it's got to be a combination. And I do really think that Chuck Fletcher understands where today's game is, especially when you bring in Danny Briere to work with you. Right. I think Danny Briere understands where the game is today. And I think the reason why I feel like they understand that is because I think it is reflected a little bit in their recent draft picks. Like, I think picking a kid like Tyson Forster fits the bill of today's NHL, but there's a lot more to it than just one guy. And there's a lot more to it than just, as you're trying to dig yourself out of the hole that you're in, trying to use too many voices of the past. And it's beyond, I'm worried about, as I'm describing it, I'm worried about the guy the guy who made draft picks in 2000 and the guy who made draft picks and trades in 2010. How about when those guys played? Go back to that too, and
I go back.
But that's far from the mentality that you need to have in today's game.
Yeah. To,
go back to that era. So, and doesn't it feel like something like an extension for Rasmus Ristolainen, who's, and this concept, because again, I mean, it was funny to me, the concept of the question, do they need to get tougher? You just need to get tougher to play against, not tougher physically. I mean, I thought that they didn't lack the physical toughness this year like they did the year before. They really lacked it the year before. They were more physical this year. I'm not calling them the greatest physical team on the planet. There's obviously the playoff teams. There's playoff teams that are better in that area. But it didn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me whether or not you've got 20 guys who know how to hit people the right way or 20 guys that just skate around really fast. If you're tough to play against and play a hard-nosed game where you're just, it's about being tenacious. You should be a tenacious player in battles, in your pursuit of the puck, in your, just in your own conviction of getting out of your own zone. If you're tenacious in those avenues, you're going to be a successful team. But that doesn't, it's not even just that it's not even just that it's something that's instilled overnight, like changing a coach or whatever is going to make them any more of a team like that. It's about the players. And
well, this is a lot of the reasons why they talk about Tortorella, because that's one thing, and I agree with you about Tortorella. But one thing I will say in his defense with regard to the Flyers and why he could be a good fit, although again, bottom line is I agree with you. I'd rather have a guy like Jim Montgomery or someone along those lines, is he does instill a lot of the elements that have been missing for the past decade that used to be staples and hallmarks of what the Flyers were, in terms of the important stuff, which still applies today in terms of structure, compete, just details and things like that. But if you don't have the talent, it can only go so far with that.
Right. And well, the funny thing was that I was in a pretty good discussion on Twitter with somebody yesterday because, all this stuff about the coach and things like that. And, just kind of a conversation that kind of got not off the rails, but it was just one of these interesting, back and forth kind of deals or whatever. And at one point in time, it got to a point where the guy asked me, so what do you even what is there even a coach for or whatever? And I said, a coach gives you structure. Like, he's going to give you an idea of how to play a structured game and the guidance to play the structured game. The problem is that when you're a general manager like Chuck Fletcher is, who's going to get out there and tell you, we defended all the time. We defended way too much. Okay. At a certain point when you defend for 60 seconds straight, there's no system and structure that's going to change the course of that. It just starts to become aimlessly running around your own zone because you're tired. You're tired of defending. Like, defensive structure is only so good for so long before it breaks down. And it doesn't matter how good the coach is. Like at one point, I think, and I threw at the line, I think it was thrown out. I think Mike Yeo used this line at different points too. Like, Scotty Bowman could be coaching the group that was out there this year, and you wouldn't have a good structure, because if you can't get out of your own way and can't do all of those things, the fundamental things that get you out of your own zone after 20, 30 seconds, hopefully, or whenever, you're going to have sustained shifts in your defensive zone. It's going to happen. Every team faces them. Even the best teams in the league face, pursuit from the worst teams. I mean, what was it? I guess it was the last game of the season. Nashville was up 4-0 before you could blink on Arizona, and then Arizona pushed back and won 5-4.
Yeah.
Because like even a team like that, they'll push. Every team has pushes. It's a matter of controlling how many times those happen in a game and how many times you don't allow them to snowball into 60 seconds or more because of a mistake. A failed clear, a bad pass, a turnover in the corner, losing a battle. When the opportunity is there, you've absolutely, without fail, got to find a way to stick to the fundamentals, stick to a structure, and get yourself out of those situations. There's really not a whole hell of a lot that goes into offensive structure when it comes down to it, because what you really want to happen more than anything is for your players who have good offensive skills to be creative and to create. That's what, to make plays. That's what that comes down to. The thing about structure is more how you escape things that are coming at you, not what you're going towards. If you have good structure defensively, you're going to turn in a lot of good opportunities because, I hate to use them as an example again, but they're one of the, and the Rangers don't exactly have great defensive structure. They lean on goaltending an awful lot, but they have offensive push. And when you make a mistake, if they jump on it, they're the transitional team. A lot of teams play transitional hockey offensively because they just wait for you to make the mistake. And that's why teams like the Flyers struggle so much to get out of their own way, because when you make those mistakes with consistency, it just continues to snowball. So, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying about Chuck Fletcher and kind of where his voice lies compared to others to an extent, because as much as he's the guy who's the general manager, and as much as he's the guy who I see many times over get the brunt of everything right now, the guy sitting on the hottest seat in town, the guy who everybody is kind of saying, that should be the next thing they should do is fire him and all that stuff. What you really need to do is get everybody who's going to be involved in this process on the same page with how a team is built, because I think that there are multiple voices that have different opinions and varying opinions on where they think that this season, or where this team should go, and how you build a good team to have a successful season in today's NHL. And until everybody figures out that the right way to do this, or at least, there can be more than one right way to do it. Until everybody at least gets a cohesive strategy, you're going to continue to just spin your wheels. And that's the way that I see it. And, it's a dangerous situation that they're in right now, because I know what the crowds looked like down the stretch. I know the way that people kind of were at the end of this year. And I know that the way that we're talking here tonight about the offseason and some of the things that could happen and what it's going to take to make any form of significant improvements. And, at this point, all you're going to be able to do with any money that you have is probably throw a bunch of it at one guy, and, which would be making another contractual mistake by, going as far up against the cap as you possibly can. I think you need to just curb it there, but whatever. Either way, I don't know that people are going to come into next year feeling giddy about the fact that there's a clean slate in a new season. I think that it's actually going to be a tougher road. And, listen, more power to them if they make any form of changes that work out and they turn in, I'm not going to sit there and look at the first 10 games of next season, whether they're winning or losing, and kind of get caught up in it, because I think we've been down that road enough times. But, if they get to the quarter point, the 30-game point, 40-game point, nearing halfway, and are really putting in a successful season, I'll gladly eat my words and change, and not change course, but, admit where I was wrong in the offseason. Yeah. But I got to call it like I see it. And that's the way I see it right now. I just don't have much optimism. And, unfortunately, to kind of use that word one more time, I don't have a lot of hope that all of the hope that they have is going to translate into successful results, because it's just not a strategy that I think is sustainable or, practical in this time.
No. I two words that come to mind thinking about what the Flyers were talking about, whether had a murky, nebulous, because a lot of it is depending on things that are indeterminate at this time, and they don't have the flexibility to really change it. Kevin, I don't want to keep you too much longer. It's really been great having you along. Ivan Fedetov, if that's how you pronounce his name. It's going to be tough with this situation with Ukraine, but getting him over here. But it does sound like they're kind of counting on him to be able to come over and be a backup or compete for a backup spot. How realistic?
Yes, Ivan Fedetov. He's been a really interesting prospect to watch. Honestly, I mean, he had a great year. I mean, you can't deny him that he had a great year as a goaltender. I'll defer to their optimism here because of the fact that they sound, Chuck sounded very confident about not only their ability to sign him, which I don't doubt that. I think they have the ability to easily sign him, but to get everything processed so he can come to North America. That was a very kind of confident statement. And then to follow it up, everything else he actually said after that, I kind of fully agreed with. I'm not surprised that he would be able to potentially compete for the backup role. First of all, that's the way to go goaltending wise, by the way, is don't worry about anything on the outside here. If Fedetov is part of the equation to compete for the job, then you've got a competition with him and at least Felix Sandstrom, if anybody else in the organization. And I'd roll forward with that. You don't need to spend a ton of money here. You roll with somebody who's on a low budget contract here. I thought Sandstrom toward the end of the year also showed that he could do enough to be a solid backup. He needs work, he needs time, but I also think that when you looked at the type of team he was playing behind, he was going to give up goals. It was inevitable. So he had enough of a good showing to me that he's going to be part of that conversation as well. So yeah, I definitely see him being part of this conversation. Fedetov is, being part of this conversation, and hopefully they can kind of get a good answer to what that situation is. It would be great if Fedetov kind of follows up the numbers that he had playing overseas and comes in, and kind of becomes an instant success to an extent, because, it would almost be or feel similar anyway to what we've seen from a couple of these other teams within the division. I mean, it would feel a lot, it kind of would feel like it would feel very much like the Flyers version of Ilya Sorokin or Igor Shesterkin and things like that. And I don't know that Fedetov's going to be any, on any level of those two. They could end up being the two best young goalies in the division. That's, chock full of them at this point. But, I certainly will have my eyes open for first of all, for that deal to go down, because it sounds like something that would go down rather quickly, something I could see them finalizing within the month, probably, if they have intentions of doing it. And then to go from there, how do they factor in getting him over here and allowing him to be part of the equation moving forward? Because if they can find a way to do that, I mean, at the worst case scenario, he's playing for the Lehigh Valley Phantoms to start the year at the worst. And, I think there's a lot worse things that could be happening to you as an organization in terms of depth at a position than having a guy who you just signed, who's just been kind of percolating over where he's been playing.
He's 25 years old, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah. He was a pick a while back now. I believe that would be 7 years back.
Yeah.
Was when he was drafted. So you've had time to let him just, kind of just sit there and simmer a little while. And now he gets to come in and maybe start playing the North American game, become a pro over here. And
he's 6'7", 6'8" or something crazy.
I think he's 6'8", which is just outrageous. I mean, imagine having a guy like that. I mean, the guy he makes me think of, I believe Steve Valiquette was one of the first guys who was this really big.
Yeah, he was just massive.
He was 6'6", and then obviously, this wouldn't be, he's taller than one of the more recent taller goalies I can remember in the system, which Anthony Stolar stood 6'6".
Yeah,
and he was just a mountain as well. But I can only imagine what a guy like this looks like, and just how big he can be. It would just be incredible. I mean, I depending on what his weight turns out to be when he comes into on top of the 6'8" frame. I mean, you think about the way that Andrei Vasilevsky looks when he, on top of his just natural size to begin with, he throws on all the padding the way that he looks. I can only imagine what this guy looks like once you throw all the padding on him and say, okay, now go out there and take care of business. That could be something to watch for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Last one before I just want to get your playoff thoughts. If you want to care to run through the playoffs or just give us a final prediction or something. But Lehigh Valley, Mike Yeo, is it possible he could end up the head coach there? Do you think they want to put him in another spot in the organization?
Yeah, I don't want to rule it out because I know they want to try to keep him around. And I thought that the way that Chuck Fletcher worded it was really well done, because the situation with Mike Yeo is exactly what it is. He's free to do whatever he wants to as of right now. I'm sure they'll have conversations, especially if he's not hired by anybody else. And you go from there, if that's the case. I don't know if they want to make a change at the minor league level, head coaching wise, 1 year down the road. Another thing that I don't know about that situation is obviously one of the things that's going to happen whenever they hire the next head coach here. You really have to be on the same page as the head coach at the NHL level if you're going to coach at the AHL level, because you really want to be teaching and using the same systems. So that's something that has to be done as well. So I don't know that they would stick with Ian LaPerriere in that role, whether they would consider Mike Yeo for that role, whether they would just go completely off the board and defer to whomever is hired and say, who do you recommend to coach the AHL team that you think would be a good guy to have in that spot to work with and to kind of bring those, all of that stuff together so that there is a seamless transition as you call guys up and whatnot. That's really the right way to do it. So I don't want to assume anything with it. I kind of always thought that Yeo had a better shot of going back to an assistant role with the team at the NHL level, just because I think he is a good communicator with players. I think that he can be that middleman. I wouldn't put it past them either to consider him for a player development role. I think that that's another thing that I could see them doing with him in some way, shape, or form. But it really is up to him. I felt like the way that he talked at the end of the year, and considering the hand he was dealt, which was not a good hand, obviously. I mean, he was, everybody knew his fate, way back when. I mean, he had been the head coach for about a month, and everybody knew his fate. So I kind of think that he was trying, I could definitely sense he was trying to coach for maybe not his job in Philadelphia, but for his job in the NHL somewhere. And there's certainly going to be openings. I mean, the most recent one that comes to mind is Detroit just opened up. So, you could see if there's anything out there like that with one of these vacancies. But if not, I think that it's more likely, unless he's A, willing to take the AHL job, and B, that's a recommendation that whomever the next head coach is kind of rolls with and is okay with, like in terms of meshing systems between the two levels. I kind of see him more in either the assistant coach role at the NHL level or maybe in the player development area, possibly, because I think that those are two areas where they might feel his services will fit a lot better than maybe as an AHL head coach.
Gotcha. So the playoffs are upon us. We've had a couple upsets already. And before I let you go, do you want to run through all your predictions? Or you just want to give us a Stanley Cup final? And
you know what? I'm usually a round by round kind of guy. I kind of read. I read it a little bit. I jotted down at one point in time. I jotted down thoughts on, okay, if I pick these teams to win in the first round, keep going and start picking further. So in the first round, I know we're underway already with some of these series. So I know that I tweeted them out. So I'm reading them off of the tweet there. I'm not turning back on what I said.
Right.
So I had Carolina in 6 over Boston, which at the moment is looking pretty good because I just saw the score of game 2 while we're at it.
Okay.
I have Toronto over Tampa in 7, which maybe is a little bit gutsy. One of my rules of thumb when I make these predictions, I've said this on other things I've done before, is if I pick the series in 7, it means I see it going either way. I just had to pick somebody who's going to win it. So that's, I'm not trying to downplay Tampa at all. And then I got two of them in the East. Don't look very good at the moment because I picked the Rangers in 5 over the Penguins, and I picked the Panthers in 5 over the Capitals, and I'm down already. So those aren't looking too good at the moment. I had Minnesota in 7 over St. Louis. I had LA in 6 over the Oilers, Colorado in 5 over Nashville, and Calgary in 6 over Dallas. So I think that, outside of Minnesota, St. Louis, I think that was a clean sweep for me in the West in game ones anyway. I think all 3 of the others won their first game, so they're off on the right foot as well. Trying to remember where I went with some of the other ones if I kept going further. So second round, I was looking at Toronto, Florida. I believe I would have had Florida moving on in that series. Carolina and the Rangers, I believe I would have Carolina moving on in that one. And then from there, I think I had Florida going to the Stanley Cup final from the East. In the West, it would have been, let's see. So Minnesota would get Colorado. I had Colorado winning. Calgary would get LA. I had Calgary winning that. I had Colorado making it to the Stanley Cup final. And, so I'm going with the 96 rematch. That's my prediction to get for the two getting to the final.
So did I. Go very good.
So we'll see if we mesh up on the final, on the champion then, because I did make a pick. Sorry to disappoint anybody who has some rooting interest in this from a Flyer perspective, but I got Colorado.
Okay. I went with Florida. I thought Bob was due to, Bob can really get hot, and Darcy Kemper, he's really been great. So I can't complain, but I had less confidence as the rounds went on. But yeah, definitely. I mean, Colorado is just, they're just,
I just, and I think I felt this way last year at one point in time, but what I feel with Colorado is what I know a lot of people felt with Tampa a couple years back when they were kind of getting ready to win their first of the 2 in a row. Or a lot of people just going, it's Tampa's year, it's Tampa's time. I'm feeling like it's Colorado's time. I think that they're as good as, for as good as they were in the regular season, with so many different pieces that kept coming in and out, key pieces. I mean, there were stretches where McKinnon couldn't play for a stretch, and Rantanen couldn't play for a stretch, and Landeskog was out. Yeah. And Makar was a constant, but nonetheless, I mean, they're just loaded with talent. They got better at the deadline, obviously. I mean, I can't see. I can see Florida giving them a little bit of a run. That's gonna be a long series if that's the final. I don't think, I believe that 96 series when it happened, that was a clean sweep for Colorado. They were in and out in 4 games. I can't see that this time around, but I'll be interested to see. Obviously, I think one of the things with Florida that we can all talk about too is they played that first playoff game, and Claude Giroux scores his first playoff goal with Florida before you can blink, and that was a reaction of a guy who's longed for it.
Oh yeah,
I would say so.
It's a shame because when the goal, I think that ended up being the winning goal, he had a turnover. And then when the puck went the other way, he didn't pick up his man. And I said, oh, not a good sequence for Giroux there.
Yeah, not at all. So, yeah, that's unfortunate, but I can't see that team staying down for too long. No. There was enough stuff, as much as I picked, like I said, I picked Florida and the Rangers in the first round in 5 games, and now I would need a clean sweep from both of them for that to actually happen after they both lose game 1. I did not love the way that Washington finished the season. That was why I felt so strongly about Florida. And now with Pittsburgh, I mean, Pittsburgh won game 1 in triple overtime with the 3rd string goalie in by the time it was all said and done. I don't know if that's sustainable. I know what people are going to be out there are thinking, and I fully agree. I'm not trying to downplay it. It is playoff Crosby, and it's that kind of thing. Like, Pittsburgh in the playoffs is a different animal. I don't deny that. But, man alive, like, I can't see the Rangers being held down for that long.
No.
I just can't see it happening. I think that they're a sneaky good team in this playoff picture. Like, and I know I said Florida and Carolina in the Eastern Conference Final. I don't discount the Rangers. I really don't. I think that they got kind of dark horse vibes for me.
Yeah, I actually picked them to beat Carolina in the semifinal. In the semifinal to get to the semifinal and play Florida. So yeah, So, well, Kev, fantastic. Really appreciate you coming on tonight and going through all of this. As tough as it was in some instances, but so where can people find you on social media, and tell us about what your latest projects?
Sure. So at Kevin_Durso on Twitter. Not gonna lie, gonna be taking a little bit of a break because of the fact that there's not gonna be a lot of news to go over and things like that. When there is, I'll be all over it, but not gonna expect a whole lot in the early going anyway. Not until draft lottery anyway. Otherwise, you can always find my stuff over at 973ESPN.com. Haven't really been on the station in a little while. It's, typically, the idea of they are a 4-for-4 Philly station. So,
sure.
Sixers in the middle of a playoff run, Philly season underway. The NFL draft was last weekend. We, kind of fall by the wayside. So, but as news hits, I'll probably be making more appearances on there as well. And another thing I'm involved with is the You Would Think podcast. We're recording tonight as well, right after I'm done here. So, going to have a new episode out. We're, during the off season, we're probably going to move to every other week to do new shows and talk about the playoffs in the moment and any news that comes up and all sorts of other stuff. So looking forward to whatever happens this off season to see how whatever this plan is comes together. And, as always, thank you guys for having me on. It was my pleasure to do it. And, next season, plenty more where this came from. Because I think, what was this? I think my third time on with you guys this season or something like that.
Yeah.
So plenty more where that came from. I always enjoy it. So happy to do it whenever you guys want.
Fantastic, Kevin. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. You take care now.
You too.
Okay. So folks, so this is probably, from what I remember, the first time you've been stuck with just me and a guest. I might be wrong, but I do appreciate you hanging with us. It's one of our longer episodes. There's a lot to plow through with this team. We wanted to give you comprehensive coverage and some playoff predictions. But you can follow Chef, who should be back with our next show, which would be in about 2 or 3 weeks. He's at Chef to the Left B, at Chef to the Left B on Twitter. You can follow the great Dan Silver at DSilver88. At DSilver88 on Twitter. He likes to talk about the Flyers. He'll go back and forth with you. And I'm Isaiah, ISAIAH _520. Don't forget the _ Isaiah _520. And with that, everybody, we should be back, I guess about 2-3 weeks, depending what the news is. So until then, have a great night. Take care.